I'm here to talk about the future of work. And it's actually probably not the future of work, it's probably the now of work is a better term for it. And I'm here because I believe very strongly that work doesn't have to suck, that work and misery don't have to be synonymous, that capitalism and humanism don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I came to all of those conclusions after the past 10 or so years of a career learning a lot about organizational development and organizational culture. And for any of you who may already be working in a startup where you have the requisite ping pong table and kegerator, and you may feel like you've already reached that work utopia, I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a few minutes. First, some background about New York Tech Meetup. So I'm the executive director of New York Tech Meetup. New York Tech Meetup is the largest meetup in the world. We have over 32,000 members, and we're growing by about 200 members a week. And that's all from a small meetup group that was started in 2004 by Scott Heiferman, who founded Meetup.com, who decided he wanted a way to sit down and talk with other people that were building tech companies. And about 2 years ago, we took that step beyond just being a meetup group and actually became a nonprofit organization with a mission of building a sustainable and diverse technology industry here in New York City. And I have, in fact, actually been working with entrepreneurs for pretty much my entire career. It's just that previous to New York Tech Meetup, those entrepreneurs tended to be an average of 8 years old and sell Girl Scout cookies. I started my career as a fundraising associate at the Girl Scouts in Southern California, and then eventually became the CEO of the organization. And Girl Scouts was an incredibly interesting place to work. I learned everything about running a business, from how to do fundraising and manage finances, to human resources, how to build programming, even how to get the best discounts on bulk quantities of toilet paper, pretty much anything you can think of. And I also learned a lot along the way about organizational culture. And unfortunately, it wasn't because the culture was great. When I was there, it was almost a 100-year-old organization. And when you get to be 100 years old as an organization, sometimes you tend to have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape, risk aversion, and a strong lack of trust. And that's what I encountered when I first started working there. So when I started working at Girl Scouts, the executive director at the time used to send a staff person to stand at the front door with a clipboard and a watch. And if we were more than 5 minutes late, we got written down on the clipboard. And if we did that more than 3 times, we were officially written up. I did a lot of fundraising lunches because I started out doing fundraising. And at fundraising lunches, you tend to serve chicken. And you'd think that this would be a relatively easy decision that I would have been allowed to make on my own. But no, I had to ask the executive director which option of chicken was the appropriate option to choose for the fundraising lunch that we would have. If you wanted to take the afternoon off, even just a couple hours off to go see your child's baseball game or school play, you'd think that you maybe could have just left the office. We employed, after all, 95% women, and almost everyone in the office was a working parent. But no, if you wanted to leave a couple hours early, if you wanted to take an extended lunch, you actually had to fill out a slip, get permission from your boss and your boss's boss in order to take an entire half day off of work because you couldn't take time off in less than half-day increments. Now, this was not that long ago, but when I first started at Girl Scouts, if we wore skirts, we were expected to wear pantyhose. And when I made the transition from fundraising to chief operating officer and then starting to get into the role of interim CEO, I was told that I needed to wear high heels and lipstick much more often. This was our dress code when I started. Pretty intense dress code, even gets into details like how many inches above your knee your skirts were allowed to be. So this environment really created an environment where there was an extreme lack of trust. And so when I got into the role of being CEO at the Girl Scouts, I decided I needed to change things. Because I looked around and I saw a team of people with tremendous potential who had had all of the inspiration and kind of passion and life completely drained out of them. And so I started looking for things that I could do to change things. And I decided to implement a flexible work program. And my first attempt at this, I will admit, was a little bit lackluster. I decided that I would let employees of a certain level and above apply to work from home 1 day a week. And I was just about to implement this program when one of my employees, one of our lowest paid employees, in fact, came up to me and asked me a question. She said, Jessica, why is it that this program is available only to the highest paid employees, and they get to save money on gas and commuting costs 1 day a week, and this isn't available to people like me, the people who need it the most? Do you trust us less? I was speechless. I had never connected this issue. I had never connected our basic personnel policies to issues of trust. And all of a sudden, there it was, clear as day, shaking all of the foundation of everything that I had understood about work. And all of our systems of work that had been built on this hierarchy where the person above you is trusted more than you. And I started thinking about the fact that why are we building organizations where we hire people who we don't trust? Even at the lowest levels of the lowest pay grades, we should be hiring people we trust. And it just set me down this path that I've been on ever since about being passionate about finding different ways to work and looking at the future of work differently. Right around that time, I stumbled on this amazing book called Why Work Sucks and How to Fix It. And I picked it up at an airport bookstore because it had sucks in the title. And I thought it was really cool that there was a business book out there that had the word sucks in the title. And I ended up being very happy that I picked it up because it outlined in great detail how two women at Best Buy corporate headquarters had taken Best Buy from being a typical corporate environment into a results-only work environment, where you basically got to work wherever you want, whenever you want, as long as the work gets done. And I decided immediately that this is what I needed to do. This would be the defibrillator paddles that would jolt our organization back to life. And within a month of reading this book, I had implemented a results-only work environment at our Girl Scout Council. We were the first nonprofit in the country to officially work in that format. And it immediately changed everything. Our dress code went from looking like this to saying this. And that switch, to me, is a symbol of how everything else changed. We went from basically saying, we don't trust you enough to dress yourself in the morning, to saying we completely trust you to get dressed in the morning. And not everything about this switch was perfect, but this totally changed my thinking around how organizations interact with their employees and how organizations are built. And that brings us to today and to thinking about startups and new companies. Because I had this really interesting transition from working for a 100-year-old company to now working with companies that are oftentimes less than 100 days old and sometimes less than 100 hours old. And what I actually expected when I made that switch was that I would see incredible differences between how old organizations functioned and how new organizations were being built. And there were things that I saw that were different. Innovation was much more common. Red Solo cups were much more common than red tape. And failure was seen as a bit more inevitable. Life in a startup looks a lot different too. At Girl Scouts, we did not have ping pong tables. We did not have kegerators. It was much more of a typical office. But as I've been around to lots of different startup offices, what I've seen is that when you strip away some of these symbols of startup life, the ping pong tables and the kegerators, what you're left with is people typing away at computers like pretty much any company in America. And that observation led me to this realization. Every company in the world actually began as a startup. And then something happened along the way, and those companies that were filled with passionate people building companies that express their ideas and their creativity and their autonomy, they turned into these giant corporate behemoths that everyone hates and quits to then go build another company. So the question that I started asking then was, how do we stop ourselves from continuing down this path to corporate hell? How do we get out of this cycle of building a company that starts with that level of passion and excitement and drive and then turns into this icky corporate thing that no one wants to work for? So I don't have all the answers, but I have a few ideas. And the first one is that if you're building a company, you really need to build a company that you are actually going to want to work for. And that may sound really, really simple, but I remember Tony Hsieh, who's now the CEO of Zappos, talking about the time that he built his first company. And when he built his first company, after a couple of years, they were doing really, really well. But he realized he was waking up every single morning not wanting to go to work. And this was a company that he built himself. And the light bulb went off, and he kind of said, you know what? I could have built this a different way. I could have built this so I don't wake up every day with a case of the Mondays. And to me, that's really about aligning yourself with what values are most important to you and thinking about what type of company you want to work for. And another quick Zappos story, but I actually want you guys to do a quick exercise first. So pull out your phone, an iPad, anything that you can write 3 words on. And if you don't want to write it down, just think about it in your head. But the exercise that I'd like you to do is think about your top 3 personal core values. So when you think about yourself, when you think about people you work with, what personality traits, what behaviors are the top 3 most important behaviors to you? And I'll give you a second to think about that. So I'll start telling you my story while you're finishing that. So I ended up going to Zappos actually for a 3-day intensive program where I got to go behind the scenes and understand how Zappos had not only built its amazing shoe empire, but how they had built a company that was so focused on service and so focused on having an amazing culture. And one of the parts of that program was that I actually got to go to a barbecue at Tony Hsieh's house. So we arrive at the barbecue and we're asked to fill out a name tag. And on the name tag, we put our name and we put our 3 top personal core values. So I'm walking around the barbecue and a little bit later I end up talking to Tony. And Tony and I get to talking about my sort of frustrations with Girl Scouts and how I'm just feel like I'm butting my head up against things that won't change and people at the high level of our national organization not wanting to see things be different. And all of a sudden he starts asking me questions. And he says, Jessica, how much do you trust the people at the highest levels of your organization nationally? And I said, I don't really trust them at all. And I was kind of confused. I didn't understand why he was asking me that. And then he says, Jessica, how much energy do those people have? And I all of a sudden look down at my name tag and realize that he is reciting back to me the core values that I put on my name tag. And I said, well, they don't have much energy. And then he said, and how much curiosity do they have? And I said, they're not very curious people at all. And he said, right. So why are you still working there? And I remember going home that night and laying on my hotel bed and just bawling my eyes out because nobody had ever pointed out to me before that deep connection between the things that I value and how important it is for those things to show up in the place that I work. And so I think that to me, as we're building new companies, if we think of them in a way as kind of virtual agar-filled petri dishes where all of the values and the norms and traditions and behaviors that we start and create end up kind of taking hold and spreading very, very quickly. And that forms the foundational elements of what your company becomes. And I think one of the things that's challenging in the world of entrepreneurship and startups is that sometimes people don't want to actually address or tackle some of the issues of structure and process and answering that question of who you are from a very fundamental place. Because in a lot of ways, things like personnel policies are seen as what the icky corporate behemoths do. And you don't want to be like that. So it's better to be kind of loosey-goosey all over the place, do whatever you feel passionate about at the time, and not talk about some of these issues. The challenge with that is, to me, and as we saw with the dress code example, there's a lot of signaling that happens when you look at some of these foundational documents. If you have in your break room a list of 10 corporate values on the wall, and trust is one of those corporate values, but your employees flip through your personnel policies and see that what you understand is that they don't even know how to dress themselves in the morning, you're signaling to them that the stuff on the wall means nothing, because what you're really saying is, we don't trust you. And so that's why, to me, if we look at policies and procedures and structure, those aren't the devil. It's the devil is really in the fact that we oftentimes fall into a trap of not addressing these issues early on, letting our attorney or an HR person define for us what our personnel policies are going to look like, what our vacation policy is going to look like, and then building the foundation of our company on something that we really haven't put that much time into, that really doesn't express what we meant to build in the first place. And the second thing that I think a lot about, and this is a tool that hopefully you can take away with you and do something with, is one of my favorite tools. So it is called the Sacred Cow Barbecue. And that sounds really, really awful. But it is not awful, it is awesome. And the Sacred Cow Barbecue, you do not have to barbecue cows. If you want to barbecue veggie burgers suffice. But the point of the Sacred Cow Barbecue is to actually pull together all of your organizational stakeholders. So all of your employees, maybe some of your customers, board members, investors, whoever has a stake in the organization. And you pull all of these people together and invite them to a barbecue. And you actually have food, you actually have a barbecue. But before people are allowed to eat, you hand them a stack of Post-it notes and give them a pen. And you ask them to write down sacred cows on the Post-it notes. And sacred cows are organizational traditions, habits, rules, ways of doing things. It doesn't matter whether they're real or perceived. It doesn't matter whether they're bad or good. The goal is to have people write down as many as they can think of. And even if you're an organization that's only 6 months old, only a year old, you've already developed sacred cows. And as people do this, as they turn in one sacred cow, they get the hamburger bun. They turn in the second sacred cow. They get the hamburger, and so on and so forth, until you've developed an entire wall of sacred cows. And the amazing thing about this exercise is that it brings the question of why back into an organization. It's amazing how quickly the word why disappears from our vocabulary once we've made certain decisions. This is the bank we use. This is the paperwork we have. This is the way we do this. This is the way that we do that. And we rarely take the time to go back and reassess that. And to me, that's one of the biggest problems with older organizations is that year after year, they've added layer after layer of all of these sacred cows to the point where you can barely move anymore. And when we did this at Girl Scouts, the crazy thing was that the number one thing that came up, the number one sacred cow when I aggregated them all together, was forms. People hated the number of forms that we had. And it turned out when we went back and looked at it, we had 52 forms that we expected volunteers to fill out at any given time or another. And so we decided to do a forms reduction project. And we went through and said, if we had started out with no forms, how many forms would we actually need in order to make sure girls were safe and that we had the information that we needed to operate? And when we added that up and created new forms, it came down to 9 forms, not 52. And to me, what we had seen before was that we had a problem with volunteers being upset with us all the time, with volunteers quitting because they felt like they were overworked. And a lot of that wasn't connected to some crazy, overall huge problem with the organization. It was largely connected to the fact that we were making them do too much paperwork. And the only way that we figured that out was by doing a Sacred Cow Barbecue and asking the question, why? And so for me, a lot of my passion around trying to help new companies not make these same mistakes really has to do with the fact that we have an amazing opportunity right now to change all of this. Because if you really think about it, all of the constructs of work that we've lived with, the 9-to-5 workday, the 40-hour work week, the way we handle vacation time, even unemployment, those things didn't always exist. We constructed those things. And if we constructed them, it means that we can also change them. And so much is changing right now about the way that people work. People have more choice now than ever before about what they do for a job. And people have a choice to find work that they feel fulfilled by, work that gives them meaning. You know, if you were born 100 years ago, 200 years ago, if you were born the son of a carpenter, you were most likely going to become a carpenter. If you were a woman, you were most likely going to stay home and take care of the children. And maybe at some point you would become a nurse, a secretary, or a teacher. And those were your options. And I think as the world of work changes, we have to pay a lot of attention to the fact that people have tremendous options now. And they are looking for workplaces that match their values. They are looking for companies that don't take being a human being out of the company setting. They want all of that. And I think the challenge that we have going forward, especially with startups, is that we have to make sure that people don't assume that because there's a ping pong table and a kegerator, that the company has good culture. We have to ask for something much deeper than that. And that is the future of work. Thank you. So thanks for hanging out. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think you worked in like a lot of different environments, so like year-long structures and things like that. So
Yep.
how did you deal with like that opposition? So what were the things that you used to make your case for like what you felt like you wanted to change?
I tended to figure out what case to make based on who I was talking to. So some people responded really, really well to data. And in the case of people that responded well to data, I had data to pull from like when we were switching to the results-only work environment, for instance, I had a lot of data about how successful Best Buy had been after making that switch that I was able to share. Some people respond to the emotional side of it, just like the human element of it, where it's like most of our staff are working parents, and our working parents, like one of them had never been to any of her daughter's school activities because she felt that she did not have permission to miss work. And so some of that appealed to some of the people that we worked with in terms of the emotional side of things. Did that answer the question? Cool. Any other questions? Yeah. So what we did was we prioritized them, and then we basically created like a little task force to tackle like the top 3 sacred cows that needed to be handled immediately. With, and we looked at them too in terms of what was low-hanging fruit. Like dealing with the forms issue was relatively low-hanging fruit, and yet it would have a significant impact because it was the #1 thing that people complained about. Yeah, and it's one of those things too where like doing it once is not enough. You kind of have to like every single year. I mean, I've even found like, I've been with New York Tech Meetup for 2 years. I realized recently that like I got us a bank account when we first started, because it was like the bank that people had recommended to me, but I hadn't like stopped to think about like, is this bank still working out for me? Like, are they providing good service? And I realized recently, I'm like, they don't have online bill pay. Like, how much time am I wasting every month by not having an easy way to pay our bills? So it's like that type of thing where, once you get into the habit of using something, unless you stop and say, is this still the right thing for me? You end up just getting into those habits, and they get deeper and deeper and harder to change as you grow. Cool. Yeah. There are a few different groups in the country. Women 2.0 is one who have been trying to compile lists of female-founded companies that have received money, but I think they've mostly concentrated on Silicon Valley and a little bit on New York. For New York Tech Meetup, we focus on New York specifically. So, like, we're actually starting next week a coalition for women in tech. We're officially launching that will be building databases of some of that information, but specifically around New York startups and women in New York. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for sticking around again.